Hi, I'm Gwendolyn Sterk, and I'm here from Sterk Family Law, and I have the privilege to be present here with Seth Matus. Welcome, Seth. Can you tell everybody what you do for a living?
I'm a labor and employment attorney.
Very good. Well, I got to tell you, we get a lot of questions about when am I entitled to leave? So we want to talk today about employment leave, because you can imagine people in a family law situation or just in their own life process. That's a common question. When do I have the ability to ask, and how is my job going to be protected within that structure? Okay, so you can tell us a little bit about the broad strokes of this area?
Sure, absolutely. And when you think about leave, I mean, there's so many different areas. We might be talking about vacation time, or sometimes they call it paid time off.
Right.
We can be talking about sick leave. I mean, when you're ill. Certain employers are large enough that they are subject to what they call the Family and Medical Leave Act, and that gives people even more time than would be available under sick leave laws.
Okay.
And then finally, when we have situations where it is domestic violence, we have VESSA, the Victims of Economic and Securities Safety Act, which allows rights to employees at that time as well.
Okay, so let's say that I'm not sure that the FMLA or the Federal Medical Leave Act will be appropriate, because that counts for employers who have how many employees?
Well, here's the thing, yes. FMLA only applies to employers who have at least 50 employees within a set area. It needs to be within a 75-mile radius. A little tricky kind of thing.
That is tricky, yeah. So if you have different locations, it might be different.
You might not be subject.
I did not know that, yeah.
Yes.
So, but if you're a small business,
yes.
Tell us about that.
If you're a small business, if you have less than 50 employees, you are not subject to the FMLA.
Okay.
But then you might have other laws that start to come into play. Maybe, and this gets really tricky, when you have companies that are located within Cook County. Chicago, definitely, 100%. Chicago has a new sick leave ordinance.
Really?
Which requires employers to provide employees with a set number of sick leave days per year, paid sick leave.
And what about unpaid?
Well, unpaid, it's actually something which can go beyond that.
Okay.
When you have other communities within Cook County, some of the communities have decided to adopt that, where there's mandatory paid sick leave. Many of the others have not. So it really does depend on where your business is located to determine whether you're going to be subject to that sick leave ordinance.
Interesting. So outside of that, either the FMLA or the local ordinance or county ordinance.
Correct.
Is there any state laws that control?
No, that is correct.
Interesting. Okay.
That's correct.
So that's with regard really to straight medical leave.
Yes, that's correct.
If you're pregnant? I mean, you get this question a lot. You have somebody come in, they're about to have a child, and they work for a company. There's 5 employees, and they're located in a collar county of Cook County.
Yeah.
Do they have the right to take time off?
Actually, not necessarily.
Well, what do you mean not necessarily?
Not necessarily, and it's a nice little tricky thing both for employers and employees.
Okay.
And what happens is it depends on what the employer does with respect to other types of people who need time off.
Okay.
If there is someone who has a different type of disability, let's say someone has been injured in a workplace accident, and they have, the employer gives them time off, even if they're not subject to FMLA.
Right.
Well, there's the Federal Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which requires the employer to provide the same type of right to the employee, to the pregnant employee,
as anybody else. So if I hurt myself, even if it's not at the job, or I'm in a car accident, and the employer gives me 2 weeks off, then if we have a pregnant employee, then you're going to have 2 weeks off for that as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then beyond that, there's also within the Illinois Human Rights Act a right to reasonable accommodation, which would be similar to disability, but this is applying to pregnancy. So maybe you have a situation where you're pregnant and you have some type of pre-pregnancy illness. You need time off to address that.
Bed rest, something of that nature. Yeah.
Yes, that would be the type of thing where that might be a reasonable accommodation for the employer. And the employer could be liable if they don't provide that to you.
Okay. So then if you do get in a situation where the company is subject to FMLA, then what are your rights?
Well, here's one thing which is important about FMLA. The company has to be big enough. But then there's also requirements for you as an employee. you need to work for the company for at least 1 year.
Okay.
And
before
you need
those
to be
rights
before
kick
those rights kick in. And you also need to work at least 1,250 hours over the course of that year. So that ends up being at least, I think it's about 15, 18 hours a week.
Okay.
So long as you're doing that, you're subject, you fall within FMLA. And then what happens is that, if you need FMLA, let's say you're pregnant, you're going to want time off, you need to provide some type of advance notice to the employer.
Right.
You need to tell, maybe provide a medical certification.
Sure.
And once you've done that, then you are allowed to take that time off.
Now, it's not mandatory that the employer pay you, except if you have sick time
That's
is paid
right.
to other employees.
That is correct.
Now, do you get the 12 weeks plus the sick time that you have, or does that include the sick time you have available through your company?
And that's another tricky type of situation. It really does depend. A lot of employers, I can tell you that, sometimes when I'm counseling employers, I tell them that they should run them concurrently. So that means, like, if you have sick pay, the sick pay gets used up, you're paid that sick pay, and then the rest of the time, the rest of the 12 weeks is unpaid.
Got it.
So
if you had 3 weeks of sick time, and then you'd have 9 weeks of unpaid leave.
That's right.
Now, the other thing is, with regard to FMLA, it also is intermittent, meaning it doesn't have to be consecutive.
If let's say you have doctor's appointments,
Right.
or you only need to come in a few times, or be gone a few times and then go back to the office, yes, you have intermittent leave for that purpose.
An example of that would be if you had cancer and you had to go for chemo treatment and you went 1 day a week or something like that. Then you would be able to use it over the course. Now, is there a time period where you have to use your 12 weeks?
Well, they talk about using it within a 12-month period.
Got it.
And
so you have to first work their 12 months if they're subject to it, and then the 12 weeks have to be taken in the course of a 52-week period.
Yes,
that is right. Over a 1 year period of time.
Yes.
All right, so say that we're now in a situation where we really have a life crisis going on. So let's just talk about it. You got a domestic violence situation in your home. You were talking about VESSA earlier.
Yes.
What does that involve?
Well, VESSA
briefly?
Is actually something very similar to the FMLA. If you are in a VESSA situation, you have a set period of time of unpaid leave. It's not paid leave, in which you can use to, let's say you need to get security, you need to go to the doctor, whatever it might be, so long as it's involving domestic abuse, you have the right to take that time off from work, and you have job protection. You can go back.
Right, but that's an Illinois law, and that applies to employers who have 1 or more employees.
So long as there's at least 1 employee, you get 4 weeks per year for VESSA.
So it might affect the time period.
Bigger, yes. Yeah. And the larger the employer is, the more time off you have under VESSA. So if you have more than 50 employees in a workplace, then you actually get 12 weeks of VESSA leave per year.
Now let's just talk about, you're going through a divorce, a life crisis. It's not really medical.
Yes.
It's not really related to domestic violence. It's just a life change. Should you be going to your employer and asking for time? And does your employer have any obligations in that situation?
It does really depend on what exactly we're talking about.
Okay.
There usually, if we're just going to see a divorce attorney, there wouldn't be a right to do that. The employer could give it to you. Sometimes some employers just have personal leave. And you can use it for that.
Let's go one step further. We got court, and in certain counties you go every day till you're done. So before you know it, you're on a 2-week trial, and your employer needs you back. What should you be doing, or what should you be taking to your employer at that point in time, knowing that you have to be in court, and what are your rights in that event?
Well, again, this is also kind of tricky, because certainly there are rights that protect you when you are a juror.
Sure.
But when you are a party, or when you are a witness,
or a litigant,
a litigant, it's not necessarily the same type of protection. And so what happens is that you need to tell the employer, I would tell them as soon as possible, that you have court on these dates, you're going to be gone, and you work with the employer, and most of the time they will work with you.
And if they won't, does it do you any good to get a subpoena from your own attorney?
I think then,
subpoenaing you back into court.
When you have that, what happens is that there is a court order, and if they're interfering with a court order, they can find themselves in some real trouble.
So if you're worried about that, would you advise people to get a subpoena?
Absolutely.
And I think that's how we solve some of these issues. But I have to tell you, when you're in that situation and when you're going through a family law matter, or you're concerned about a medical issue, the issue of employment leave is important because you understand it from the employer's perspective. They got to produce their widgets. They got to get their work done.
They need their work.
And it's got to be done. On the other hand, you have a life crisis, and that balance and finding that between the two is really critical.
Right.
So we appreciate your time today. Can you tell people how they could get a hold of you?
Sure. They can reach out to me. My website is www.Matus Law Office, and that's MATUS lawoffice.com. You can also call me at area code 630-470-6875.
Well, very good. And if you're having any of these issues and you're going through a family law crisis, or you know that something's going to change, we're here for you. We do family law, we do estate planning. We're happy to have you in for a free consultation so that you understand what your obligations are. And we can bring Seth on board if we need to do that at that point, or direct you to him if you need specific attention for your employment-related matters. So thanks for coming out today.
Thank you.
And I think that our audience will certainly appreciate this information.
Thanks.